Beneath the Pacific Northwest lies a sleeping giant, a fault line so powerful that when it finally moves, it could change life as we know it. This is the Cascadia Subduction Zone, a 600-mile stretch where the Juan de Fuca Plate is slowly being pushed under the North American Plate. Unlike the more famous San Andreas Fault, which constantly releases stress in small, noticeable quakes, Cascadia stays completely silent. No tremors, no warning signs, just a deep, unsettling stillness. And that silence is exactly what makes it so dangerous. In 2011, Japan was devastated by a magnitude 9.1 earthquake, triggered by the Tohoku Subduction Zone, an event that unleashed a massive tsunami, destroyed entire cities, and caused a nuclear meltdown. The terrifying truth is that Cascadia is almost identical to Japan's fault in structure, size, and potential for destruction. And just like Japan before 2011, the Pacific Northwest has been quiet for far too long. Scientists call this seismic silence, and it usually means that pressure is building, waiting for the day it will be violently released. The last time Cascadia ruptured was in January 1700. That earthquake, estimated to be a magnitude 9.0, sent a massive tsunami racing across the Pacific, slamming into Japan with no warning. That was over 300 years ago. And according to geologists, we are now in the window where another megaquake is not just possible, it's overdue. So what does this eerie silence really mean? Could it be that Cascadia is holding back centuries of built-up energy, preparing for a disaster even greater than the one in 1700? If so, how close are we to the moment it finally breaks? Before we answer that, let's take a look at the growing signs that a disaster might be closer than we think. Scientists have been studying the Cascadia Subduction Zone for decades, searching for clues about when and how the next megaquake might strike. Unlike regular earthquakes, which happen along faults that move frequently, subduction zone quakes occur after centuries of built-up stress, making them incredibly difficult to predict. But thanks to advanced technology and geological evidence, researchers have pieced together a terrifying picture of what's to come. One of the biggest breakthroughs came from studying ghost forests, stands of dead trees along the Pacific Northwest coast. These trees, killed by sudden land subsidence and saltwater flooding, provide an eerie timestamp of past megaquakes. By analyzing tree rings, scientists determined that the last Cascadia earthquake happened in 1700. Further proof came from layers of sand buried deep inland, carried by massive tsunamis. And perhaps the most haunting evidence of all was found across the Pacific. Written records from Japan describing a deadly orphan tsunami that struck their shores on January 26, 1700. There had been no earthquake felt in Japan, meaning the tsunami had to have come from across the ocean. It was undeniable. Cascadia had ruptured in a colossal event, and it would do so again. Modern seismic models paint a grim picture of what will happen when the fault finally gives way. A magnitude 9.0 earthquake would shake the Pacific Northwest for as long as 5 minutes, causing buildings to collapse, highways to buckle, and entire cities to be reduced to rubble. But the earthquake is just the beginning. Within minutes, a massive tsunami, some waves reaching over 50 feet high, would slam into the coastline, wiping out everything in its path. Coastal towns from Northern California to British Columbia would be underwater. Scientists predict that in the first hour alone, tens of thousands of lives could be lost. And for those who survived the initial wave, the aftermath could be just as deadly. Fires, landslides, and an overwhelmed emergency response system struggling to reach those trapped under debris. The scariest part? We know this disaster is coming. The science is clear. The models are terrifyingly consistent. And yet, most people living in the Pacific Northwest are unprepared. Critical infrastructure remains vulnerable. Emergency plans are outdated or non-existent. Some coastal towns don't even have adequate evacuation routes. If we can see this disaster coming, why aren't we ready? What will it take for us to act before it's too late? On a cold winter night in January 1700, without warning, the ground beneath the Pacific Northwest began to shake violently. Trees snapped like twigs, entire sections of coastline collapsed, and villages along the shore were swallowed by the sea. The earthquake was so massive that it sent shock waves through the land for what must have felt like an eternity. But the worst was yet to come. Far across the Pacific, in Japan, people living along the coast witnessed something strange. Without any warning, the sea suddenly withdrew, exposing the ocean floor. Minutes later, a massive wall of water crashed onto their shores, flooding villages and sweeping away everything in its path. The Japanese, well versed in the ways of tsunamis, were baffled. There had been no earthquake felt in their land, no shaking to signal an impending wave. It was a mystery, one that wouldn't be solved for over 300 years. Centuries later, scientists studying the Cascadia Subduction Zone uncovered shocking geological evidence of this forgotten disaster. Along the coasts of Washington and Oregon, eerie ghost forests stood frozen in time. Groves of trees that had suddenly died when the land beneath them dropped, allowing salt water to flood their roots. By examining tree rings, researchers pinpointed the exact year they perished: 1700. Further proof came from layers of tsunami sand deposits buried deep inland, showing just how far the waves had reached. It became clear that this was no ordinary earthquake. This was a mega-thrust event, one so powerful it reshaped entire landscapes and sent a killer wave racing across the Pacific. But long before modern science confirmed the disaster, Indigenous tribes of the Pacific Northwest had already preserved its memory in their oral traditions. The stories passed down through generations tell of a terrifying night when the earth shook and the ocean rose in fury. Some tribes speak of a great battle between Thunderbird and the whale, a violent struggle that shook the land and brought the sea crashing in. Others tell of entire villages vanishing, of people who fled to higher ground only to look back and see their homes swallowed by water. To them, this wasn't just a myth. It was a warning that one day it would happen again. And that warning should terrify us. The same fault that ruptured in 1700 remains locked today, building pressure, biding its time. The forces that unleashed that disaster have not gone away. If it happened before, what's stopping it from happening again? The truth is, nothing. And when it does, will we be ready? Scientists studying the Cascadia Subduction Zone have come to a chilling conclusion: we are overdue for the next megaquake. By analyzing past earthquakes along this fault, researchers found that Cascadia follows a cycle, rupturing roughly every 200 to 500 years. The last major event happened in 1700, 324 years ago. That means we are already in the window where another disaster could strike at any time. The longer it stays silent, the more stress builds up beneath the surface, and the bigger the quake. Could be when it finally happens. And in recent years there have been troubling signs. While Cascadia itself remains eerily quiet, nearby faults have been stirring. In 2021, a powerful magnitude 6.7 earthquake struck off the coast of Oregon, rattling the region. Seismologists believe this could be a sign that stress is shifting. underground. Even more concerning are the so-called slow slip events, a hidden and little understood type of seismic activity. Every 14 months or so, parts of the Cascadia Fault begin to creep, moving at about the speed your fingernails grow. This movement doesn't cause noticeable shaking, but it silently transfers stress deeper into the locked portion of the fault, the very section capable of unleashing a magnitude 9.0 earthquake. Some scientists believe these slow slip events could be a ticking time bomb, slowly nudging Cascadia toward its breaking point. And then there's the unpredictability factor. Earthquakes don't follow schedules, and no one can say with certainty when the next one will strike. But when you take all the evidence together, the centuries of built-up pressure, the recent tremors, the slow slip events shifting stress beneath our feet, the picture becomes clear. We are standing on borrowed time. Some experts warn that Cascadia could rupture tomorrow. Others believe we may have decades left. The terrifying truth? We simply don't know. But every day that passes brings us one step closer to the moment, when silence turns to chaos. Could tomorrow be the day? And if it is, what happens next? It will start with a deep, guttural roar, a sound unlike anything most people have ever heard. Then, the shaking begins. At first, it might feel like a heavy truck rumbling past, but within seconds, the ground will convulse violently. Skyscrapers in Seattle and Portland will sway like trees in a storm, their glass windows shattering into deadly shards. Bridges and overpasses will twist and collapse. Gas lines will rupture, igniting massive fires across the region. Power grids will fail, plunging millions into darkness. The Cascadia Megaquake will last for as long as 5 minutes, an eternity of destruction that will leave entire cities unrecognizable. But the earthquake itself is only the beginning. Off the coast, the ocean will be pulling back, one of the only warnings of what's coming next. Within 15 to 20 minutes, a massive tsunami with waves over 50 feet high will come crashing down on the Oregon and Washington coastline. Coastal. Towns like Seaside, Newport, and Crescent City will be completely wiped off the map. The water will surge miles inland, swallowing everything in its path. Entire communities will be gone in an instant. And for those who don't evacuate in time, there will be nowhere to run. Scientists predict that more than 10,000 people could die in the first few hours alone. Some estimates suggest the real number could be far higher. The survivors will be left in a world that no longer functions. Roads will be torn apart, making rescue efforts nearly impossible. Airports will be destroyed, isolating the region from outside aid. Hospitals will be overwhelmed, or worse, collapsed. Communication systems will fail, leaving people with no way to call for help. In some places, it could take weeks before emergency responders even arrive. And with food, water, and medical supplies running out, the real fight for survival will begin. So, the question is, would you survive the first 24 hours? Would you know where to go, what to do, or how to find help? Most people wouldn't. And that terrifying reality should make us ask, if we know this is coming, why aren't we more prepared? Not all places in the Pacific Northwest will experience the Cascadia Megaquake the same way. Some cities will shake violently but remain standing, while others will be reduced to rubble. And for the communities along the coast, the earthquake itself might not even be the biggest threat. The tsunami will be the true killer. Let's start with the worst-case scenario. Coastal towns, places like Seaside, Newport, and Ocean Shores, sit directly above the locked portion of the fault. When the rupture begins, these areas will be among the first to feel the quake's full force. Buildings will collapse, roads will split open, and within minutes, entire neighborhoods could be swallowed by liquefaction, where the ground itself turns to liquid. But the true horror comes after the shaking stops. A towering tsunami will follow within 15 to 20 minutes, leaving little time for escape. Entire towns will be wiped off the map, much like what happened in Japan in 2011. If you live on the coast and you don't evacuate immediately, survival is unlikely. Seattle, Portland, and Vancouver will be farther from the rupture zone, but they are by no means safe. Seattle, built on soft soil and artificial fill, will experience intense shaking that could liquefy entire districts, toppling buildings and sinking roads. The city's aging infrastructure, including its seawall and viaducts, could fail catastrophically. Portland faces a similar fate, with its bridges over the Willamette River expected to collapse, cutting off vital routes for emergency response. And Vancouver, despite being farther north, is still at serious risk. Its high-rise buildings are designed to withstand earthquakes. But for how long? A magnitude 9.0 quake could push even modern engineering to its limits. Then there's the FEMA warning that has terrified experts for years. Everything west of I-5 will be toast. This isn't an exaggeration. The Interstate 5 corridor runs north to south through Washington and Oregon, roughly marking the dividing line between the areas that will be devastated and those that will merely be badly damaged. Cities west of I-5 will experience the worst shaking, the worst infrastructure failures, and the highest tsunami risk. But even areas east of I-5 won't be safe. With collapsed highways, downed power lines, and overwhelmed hospitals, the entire Pacific Northwest will be thrown into chaos. If you live anywhere in this region, the reality is unavoidable. This earthquake will change everything. The only question left is whether we'll be ready when it does. For all our technological advancements, one brutal truth remains. We cannot stop a megaquake from happening. The forces at work beneath the Cascadia Subduction Zone are beyond human control. The plates will keep shifting, the pressure will keep building, and one day the fault will snap. But what we can do is try to see it coming before it's too late. In Japan, where earthquakes are a constant threat, an advanced early warning system gives people precious seconds, sometimes even minutes, to take cover before the shaking begins. High-tech sensors placed along the fault detect the first signs of movement and instantly send alerts to phones, trains, and emergency services. This system has saved countless lives by shutting down bullet trains, stopping factory machinery, and giving people time to brace for impact. So why doesn't the U.S. have something just as good? The truth is, we've tried. The Shake Alert system, developed by the U.S. Geological Survey, is a step in the right direction. It uses a network of ground sensors to detect quakes in real time and send out warnings. But here's the problem. It's nowhere near complete. Funding has been inconsistent, sensor coverage is patchy, and the alert system isn't fast enough to give people real warning in a worst-case scenario like Cascadia. By the time you get the notification, the shaking might have already started. Cities like Seattle and Portland could take major steps to prepare, retrofitting buildings, reinforcing bridges, and designing tsunami-safe zones. But are they actually doing it? The answer is frustrating. While some improvements have been made, progress is slow. Many older buildings remain vulnerable, and some coastal towns still don't have clear evacuation plans. The reality is, the Pacific Northwest isn't ready for what's coming, and if we don't take drastic action soon, we may be forced to face the consequences unprepared. So what will it be? Will science and preparation save us from catastrophe? Or is it already too late? When the ground starts shaking, Every second counts. Most people freeze, unsure of what to do. But in a megaquake, hesitation can be deadly. Experts call it the 1-minute rule. If you don't act immediately, you may not get another chance. The moment the shaking begins, drop, cover, and hold on. Get under the sturdiest piece of furniture you can find, preferably a solid table or desk. If there's nothing nearby, crouch next to an interior wall, away from windows and anything that could fall on you. Do not run outside. Falling debris, power lines, and collapsing buildings make the streets even more dangerous. If you're in bed, stay there and cover your head with a pillow. And if you're near the coast, don't wait. As soon as the shaking stops, move to high ground immediately. Survival doesn't just depend on instinct, it depends on preparation. Experts warn that after a Cascadia Megaquake, help may not arrive for weeks. That means you need to be ready to survive on your own. Every household in the Pacific Northwest should have an earthquake survival kit with at least 2 weeks' worth of food and water per person. You'll also need a flashlight, batteries, a first aid kit, and a way to purify water in case supplies run out. Sturdy shoes are a must. Broken glass and debris will be everywhere. And don't forget a whistle. If you get trapped under rubble, it could be your only way to call for help. But for those near the coast, the biggest danger isn't the earthquake. It's the tsunami. Scientists say that after a Cascadia rupture, the first wave could arrive in 15 to 20 minutes. That's all the time you have to get to high ground. The rule of survival is simple. Don't wait for an official warning. Don't stop to grab belongings. Just go. Tsunamis move fast, faster than you can drive in traffic. So your best chance is to run, not drive, to a designated evacuation zone. If you don't know where the nearest one is, find out now, because in an emergency, there won't be time to figure it out. So ask yourself, would you be ready if the Cascadia Megaquake struck tomorrow? Would you know what to do, where to go, and how to survive? Because the clock is ticking, and when the moment comes, there will be no second chances.